Welcome to Living in Chicago, the podcast where I interview real Chicagoans about the neighborhoods that they live, work, and play in. I'll be your host. My name is Jake Lyons, and in this episode, which is actually the first real interview episode ever of this show, I interview Eric Scull. Eric is a longtime friend of mine, a longtime resident of Chicago, who has a lot of great experiences and things to share about the neighborhoods that he's lived in, and is an even longer time podcast host. He is the host of the longest running Harry Potter podcast known to man. For all of you Harry Potter fans out there, go check that out. The link will be in the show notes. And is just a veteran of podcasting, and is gracious enough to help me on some of the technical side of these things and all that. But, in this episode, we get into some of the neighborhoods that he has lived in and worked in and played in along the way. A lot of the conversation will revolve around some neighborhoods that he's jumped around between in the northwest side of town. He's been in some other areas too. I think he did a little River North, little Oak Park out there before, but for the most part, we focus on the part of town on the sort of far north side, a little bit west. Pretty much thinking if you're familiar with Irving Park Road, north of that, north of about Montrose ish, and then west of Western, kind of between Western and Pulaski or Kedzie, is the general area that we spend a lot of time talking about in the sort of the Ravenswood, Lincoln Square, Albany Park, Irving Park. We spent a little bit of time actually talking about he thought he lived in Albany Park, but by the letter of Google Maps law, he actually lives in Irving Park, but we don't really talk a whole lot about Irving Park because he's kind of on the very fringes of that. So from a more of a lifestyle standpoint, he would consider himself more Albany Park or Lincoln Square, where he's spent a lot of time living right in that actual neighborhood in the heart of it, which we spend some time talking about. And just to kind of go over just a quick couple little factoids about these neighborhoods. So if you're following along on video, or if not, Lincoln Square, niche.com is a place that I like to go every once in a while. It's just kind of like a nice little, they do a pretty decent job of giving a little report card based on reviews and public data and how that compares to the average nationally on certain things and stuff like that. If we're talking Lincoln Square on niche.com, overall grade on there is an A. Some of the better grades that it gets are on good for families, nightlife, diversity, health and fitness, commutes, outdoor activities. Those all have A's or A pluses, A minuses. Some C's that it gets are housing, cost of living, which makes sense. It can be a pricier place to live compared to some other places. Weather, which not a whole lot anyone can do with that. It's Chicago, so weather is going to be what it's going to be. Crime and safety gets a C. Any kind of any letter grade that's being assigned to any Chicago neighborhood in terms of crime and safety, consider that this is compared to the national mean. So, Chicago's a bigger city. So compared to just think of the most average town in America you can think of, and that's what we're comparing Chicago to. Is not exactly apples to apples, but if you're comparing it, it'd be more interesting to maybe compare that letter grade to other neighborhoods in Chicago, and maybe if you were to skew it or weight it a little bit differently, it might look a little different on that. So that's a quick little snapshot of Lincoln Square. If you're looking to buy anything there, median home value, at least according to this, is $422,000. I'm a real estate agent. I could go into much more specific stats on that. It's obviously going to vary very widely if you're trying to get a house or a condo, or how big you want, all that kind of stuff. I mean, that's there's a lot that goes into all that, but that's a decent enough number to throw at you for just kind of one catch-all number. And then if we're heading over to Albany Park, the overall grade that it gets on there is a B plus. So the again, outdoor activities, good for families, nightlife, diversity, health and fitness, commute, those all get high high grades. Crime and safety is again a C. Public schools is coming in at a C plus according to this. However they grade that. Cost of living, housing, similar C. And again, these are all based on according to compared to national averages and things like that. So Chicago, big city, is going to be a little bit more expensive of a place to live than some just your most average town in America that you can think of. But if you're comparing it to sort of the other bigger premier cities in America, might come out a little bit more favorably compared to those. But it's all relative. These are just quick little catch-alls. Nothing to completely base any opinions on. Hope that's what the point of the show is to actually hear from the people that live there, on what is the day-to-day life really like there, and things like that. But I thought it might be helpful just to kind of get at least a quick little snapshot of what we're getting into beforehand. And, with that, I will go ahead and get right into our interview with Eric, and I hope you enjoy it. And hey, if you do, please leave a review or a comment. Up to 5 stars is what you can give us. Hope you do. And here is our interview with Eric. All right, joining us for the inaugural episode of the Living in Chicago podcast. What a treat, what an honor. We have a podcasting legend coming on here and showing me the ropes and teaching me a little bit of tech stuff behind the scenes in and around this interview. But this interview is going to be awesome as well. We have Eric Scull. If you have been around the Harry Potter scene at all, there's a pretty decent chance that you'll recognize Eric. He has, is it the most downloaded Harry Potter is up there, right? Podcast.
We've been probably yeah. We couldn't say because we don't know everyone else's download numbers, but we will say we were the first Harry Potter podcast.
That's fair enough. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
You've been doing podcasts for, you said what, 18 years?
18 years.
That's insane. I think that's longer than podcasts have even been a thing. You doing podcasts predate podcasts somehow.
It's almost, that would be really funny. We were doing it before it was cool. No, it was almost the beginning of podcast when podcasts have actually been around a real long time, but in terms of other people being able to access them, what makes a podcast, how we'd recognize it today, happened in about early 2005. And essentially iTunes at the time launched their Apple Podcast directory, which allowed for the first time really the world.
Gotcha. Sorry, looks like my internet went out a little bit there. But so you were saying that basically in 2005 Apple created a way for everyone to actually access the podcast, and
absolutely.
That's okay.
Absolutely. But thank you for having me on. I'm excited to talk about my favorite topic that isn't Harry Potter, is living in Chicago. So I'm thrilled.
Well, you're in the right place. Right on. So all right, so we were chatting a little bit before we got on about what to even call the neighborhood that you live in, and this is kind of a nice little case study in Chicago neighborhoods, in that sometimes it's not super straightforward, the neighborhood that you even live in, because so technically your address, so we don't give the exact address, but basically what Montrose and Kedzie would be kind of like the nearest like major intersection, right?
Yeah, and crucially just south of Montrose, as we've learned. Makes
Yes, it does. So you're just like a couple blocks south of Montrose, which would technically, according to Google Maps, the almighty Google Maps anyway, would place you in the Irving Park neighborhood. But I feel like, I don't know, this is in terms of actual lifestyle, you probably don't really see yourself as living in Irving Park. You're probably doing more like Albany Park things or even Lincoln Square things, right?
It's exactly as you said. The Albany Park is the neighborhood I thought I lived in until last night when we were chatting. And my supermarket is in Albany Park. My all of my good eats, that I enjoy are in Albany Park. So yeah, it turns out I've been eating and shopping in a different neighborhood. But here's the thing: what really is the dividing line? Even as a I know where my grocery store is. I'm proud to live, across the street from one, basically. So I guess the lines kind of blur is what I'm saying. most recent thing I said was that the neighborhoods seem to the lines seem to blur when it's like actually living in the neighborhoods. That's all I was saying.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. And yeah, there's a lot of areas that are like that. I think the River North area is always kind of my classic example of like technically that's called the near north side, but within the near north side you have River North, Streeterville, Gold Coast, Old Town.
Oh my,
All these
yeah.
different like subcategories of neighborhoods that like every intersection in Chicago wants to kind of have like its own little identity.
I was gonna say, isn't Old
But
Town just like one block on Wells Street between Division and like whatever the next street up is?
basically, yeah, pretty much up to north, a little bit, yeah, like
3 4
just
blocks.
just north of north, basically, yeah, yeah. It's
Yeah.
not a big area at all. But well, let's actually take a step back here. So you've lived in Chicago in general for how long now?
15 years.
15 years, okay. And you're originally from Pennsylvania,
Yep.
Reading, Pennsylvania. So
Reading actually.
Reading, I'm
Yeah,
sorry,
it's
Reading,
no, it's a hard,
Pennsylvania.
it's a confusing one. Yeah, it's we're famous for being on Monopoly. The Reading Railroad is one of the 4 railroads that you can buy in the game.
Nice. That's a pretty legit claim to fame. Not gonna lie.
Thanks. It's like you may have
I
heard of
mean,
us. We're on Monopoly.
yeah.
But yeah, the Reading train lines used to connect like the whole Northeast. It was a major kind of company. So that's all gone and gone away. But growing up, I grew up in that town. It's about 45 minutes from Philadelphia,
Mhm.
and that was fine. But I found Chicago pretty young and absolutely fell in love with the city and everything it has to offer. Been here ever since.
Cool. Because I imagine most of your peers growing up were probably, if they were going anywhere, they were probably going obviously to Philadelphia or New York or Boston, or they probably more East Coast centric would be my guess. I mean, I don't know. Maybe I'm just stereotyping, but
Yeah,
you
you're
know.
exactly, you're right on the money. Because a lot of the people, so like I did some theater in high school, and the major schools that, pretty much everyone I know went to was either Temple in Philadelphia or NYU in New York. So those
Mhm.
and then so my friends from high school to this day, or the people I'm connected with over Facebook, I should say, are still in either New York or Philadelphia. But that was not me.
Yeah. Well, nice to have reasons to visit at least.
That's
They're
true.
still cool cities, but yeah. So what drew you to Chicago over those other places?
I ended up I was in a relationship actually where the girl was from Iowa, and that was very much, Chicago had been where she had family and visited before. And so when it came time to start my second year of undergrad for colleges, I applied locally to Chicago, and got into DePaul. And so that then facilitated. I had toured, I think, like uh, Northwestern, and a few other schools, but DePaul totally spoke to me. So I moved to Chicago more or less sight unseen. To be honest, if I'm really talking about why I'm here in Chicago, I had a brilliant experience the very first time I was ever in Chicago. Was for the 5th Harry Potter book coming out, and this was in 2003, so 5 years before I'd lived here. But I had visited because there was a special midnight release party in Oak Park, on Oak Park Avenue, the main thoroughfare of Oak Park, and they had transformed all of the shops into Harry Potter shops from like Diagon Alley and things. And I had such a great experience due to my work with the Harry Potter website, MuggleNet.com, and things. I got to like kind of MC that event. I was very young, but it was a really great and I would say formative experience that always left a impression on me. And so when the time came just a few years later to actually figure out where I wanted to live over the next couple of years, because I left home at 18, I really didn't look back to Reading. I felt like the town I'd grown up in had nothing to offer me. And, jobs weren't really in my field and that kind of thing. The big city was so welcoming. And speaking really quickly about Philadelphia, New York, LA, I had visited those places growing up, and a lot more often. You could get a bus for pretty cheap to New York, be there in about 90 minutes, and I was always in Manhattan. And that was fine. But something about Chicago is I've used the phrase "my speed." There's just
Mhm.
something about it. everything from the people to the way it's laid out to, there's just a lot to love in the Midwest.
Yeah.
And I felt an immediate connection that was more than nostalgia, more than some of its parts to Chicago. And that's why I've been here ever since. I could see myself here indefinitely.
Hmm. Nice. Nice. Yeah. Yeah, I always kind of explain Chicago as like it kind of has all the amenities of a New York City, but there's just more. You don't feel as claustrophobic. It's still that Midwest kind of vibe, kind of attitude, I guess, a little bit more. Which I don't know. I kind of think that a lot of the reputation of like New Yorkers, being whatever jerks or whatever is like a little overblown. Like the few times that I've visited, like everybody's fine. It's like, you just have to break them out of their zone a little bit, because it's like at a certain point, it's like you can't even blame them, because it's just there's so many people that it's this sensory overload. So why would you stop and consider the humanity of this other person who's next to you? It's
Ah,
like there's millions of them everywhere.
well,
So, but
that's
once you
just
just
it.
like,
Yeah, I
yeah.
mean, everybody's trying to get on to that little island. Everybody who lives
Hmm.
in, they're commuting and they're coming from Jersey, they're coming from Connecticut, they're coming from, Massachusetts every friggin' day, having to get from some train to some bus to some train,
Hmm.
or sit for hours and trying to get into a tunnel to get onto the tiny little island. It's not ideal. I respect the heck out of the history of New York, but
Yeah.
Chicago, you mentioned it being more spread out or more, I don't know, just room to breathe, less claustrophobic. It's the alleys.
It's alleys. Yeah.
The best thing that ever happened to
100%.
Chicago was it burned to the ground
Yep.
because they were
Say that
able
all
to
the time.
rebuild. Yep, and it just so they built it so smart with a dedication and enthusiasm to kind of rejuvenation and new forms of architecture and stuff. So yeah, I don't need
Hmm.
to wax, but you and I are clearly both lovers of Chicago. But yeah, I just found the city and I was blown away, and it continues to offer so much to me. I'm very proud to live here for sure.
Yeah. And you've lived in a bunch of different areas, right? So you mentioned, I think I saw Oak Park was a place that you've been for a while. And what are all the kind of different
Yeah, so
neighborhoods
I,
that
I
you've
I
been in?
did I did at one point live in Oak Park, and it was, as I mentioned, mostly because of that formative experience I had.
That's
But it
funny.
was it
Yeah.
was actually my probably like my sixth place I lived was Oak Park. Um, the reason I actually listed the previous place I lived is because I actually see them all as one area. So again, we're crossing neighborhood lines technically here. But I did start out in a studio in the Gold Coast. And I think it might have been Streeterville. But the kind of money I was paying for the size of the place I was getting was way overblown. Even then, it's 2008. And yeah, that was just not realistic. So the neighborhood I moved to from downtown was Lincoln Square, and literally, I can promise you it was Lincoln Square because it was on Lincoln, right beneath or above the sign that says Lincoln Square. So it was right above Dagerberg Academy of the Martial Arts. So it was
Uh-huh.
heart of Lincoln Square. And while I
Nice.
have moved 5 or 6 times since then, they've all been within a few blocks of like my previous place.
Mm.
So and in a westward trajectory. So technically, even after I first moved, I was no longer in Lincoln Square. It became kind of Ravenswood Manor, and
Hmm.
now, as we know, I'm in Irving, or Albany Park, or is there a separate neighborhood called Old Irving, or is it just referred to that kind of colloquially?
Uh, yeah. So it's kind of a subcategory of Irving Park. It's kind of
Okay,
similar to what I was. It's under the umbrella of Irving Park, and then there's Old Irving Park. Um, yeah. So Old Irving Park is a little bit more west, a little bit more toward over by the highway,
got it. Okay, so
from
I'm yeah,
where
so I'm
from
not
where
in
we
it.
are. But
Yeah,
no.
but yeah, so I kind of tend to look at it all as being either Lincoln Square, or the Ravenswood area. And so that's kind of how I conceptualize it. But I think what it is really is I found the neighborhood for me. And again, just like finding Chicago and feeling spoken to, I love everything about Lincoln Square and Ravenswood Manor in general. Essentially, the very end of the Brown Line.
Hmm.
Everywhere from Kimball to Western, is, I
Hmm.
think, a really great area due to its proximity, its connection to downtown via CTA if you want to go downtown on CTA. It's only a 30-minute, train ride. But when I first moved from the Gold Coast to Lincoln Square, even being in that bustling heart of Lincoln Square, I started sleeping better, and I didn't know why. And after a little bit of reflection, I was like, oh wait, when I was living on LaSalle Street, the bus would come by every 6 minutes, and it would raise and it would
Hmm.
lower, and it would, even overnight, and the ambulances and the sirens and the emergency stuff.
Hmm.
Living downtown was loud, and Lincoln Square, again, even the heart of Lincoln Square, was quiet. And I started sleeping better because I wasn't getting interrupted sleep at all. And so here you are, you have this neighborhood halfway out of the city, still well within city limits. Of
Hmm.
course, the people who come in, tourists, think it's forever away. They
For
think it's
sure.
another state. But no,
Yeah.
we're only halfway out.
Canada.
Yeah, it feels like Canada to them, but it's 20 minutes on the train. And then you're out and you get these tree-lined streets,
Hmm.
tons of eateries, lots of local haunts, lots of bars, and pet-friendly apartments. Actually, I was a former girlfriend told me I was going to get kicked out of my neighborhood because I didn't have a dog. So it's like or a baby. You need either a dog or a baby to live in Ravenswood
Yeah.
Manor. That's what I was told about. But and
Yeah.
I still have
I
need
always
to go
say
visit.
puppies and strollers. It's the land of
Yeah,
puppies and strollers.
the
Yeah.
land of puppies and strollers. But I'll tell you what, even without those things, I love it here. And so that neighborhood, that vibe of what I'm like latching onto here is just peace and quiet while still
Hmm.
having all of the, like you said, you use the word amenities. That's exactly right. Like I just
Hmm.
feel like this neighborhood being here gives me so much. And the component that I'm sure we'll talk about more soon is money. Because it is not the most expensive neighborhood to live in Chicago. And in fact, the whole trajectory of where I've lived, the apartments have been, I would say, probably the average rate for apartments in Chicago. I never once had to consider not living in Ravenswood, Ravenswood Manor, Lincoln Square, due to it being much cheaper anywhere else. So I found it to be
Hmm.
very agreeable. As things were rising, so too was my income, so it was fine.
Yeah. Yeah, it definitely is an area that's just it strikes just a perfect balance of that price for quality. That kind of like quality price, equilibrium is just seems to be like right in that sweet spot around like the Lincoln Square, Albany Park, Irving Park areas is definitely nice. Um yeah, so let's see. Yeah, you mentioned some of like the, bars, restaurants, haunts, things like that. What are a couple of the ones that you frequent either the most or that you would most recommend or, things that you've grown attached to?
Yeah, it's actually been sad. I was in Lincoln Square over the weekend and right on Lincoln, and I was just reminiscing about some of the places that have long gone, unfortunately.
Hmm.
Chicago has lost the Chicago Brauhaus, which was
Hmm.
a big, great. Have you ever had a chance to eat there a few years ago?
Man, I not really. I went in there. Emma and I like peeked our heads in there one night, and it was really crowded, and we were just like, nah, But it looked
Yeah,
really cool, and they didn't. It wasn't even like a COVID thing. They just decided. I think they shut down like before COVID, even didn't they? Or
yeah,
maybe
I
I'm
think
getting
they
that
did. I
wrong,
think they
but
did. Yeah, no, I think they did. And
yeah,
and now it's a medical office, or kind of
right.
urgent care. Which, yes, I need urgent care because I'm so shocked that the Brauhaus is no longer there. But no, honestly, for your buck, depending on cuisine, I'm thrilled because Albany Park, in particular, is the most ethnically diverse, and for cuisine as well, neighborhood in Chicago. They have a Taste of Albany Park, which is an annual festival, and really
Hmm.
showcasing all of the cuisines you can get here. I'm a block and a half from this amazing Mexican place. There's tons of Middle Eastern. I can get pretty much everything that I want. There's a Easy Street Cafe on Irving Park, I think just east of Sacramento, west of California. I shout out that place specifically because they do a mac and cheese pizza, which is just absolutely game changing. And they have
Okay.
cheese curds as well, which I go for. But yeah, other specific places. Let's see. So the Mexican place I go to is called El Tezcal. And that's just
Hmm.
there's never anybody in there, but it's the best food you've ever had.
Yeah, I know that
And
place. It's on like Montrose and kind of right there, right? Like Montrose and
yeah, right
Quincy.
there, right there.
Yeah.
And but I will say one of the places that I lived catty corner from that I just adore and still to this day am thrilled about is called Rockwell's Neighborhood Grill, or Rockwell's Bar and Grill.
Yes.
And it's right off the Rockwell Brown Line stop. It's, 2 doors down from there. And they have a rotating beer list. They have great food. I always get just the burger that's there. And it has been one of those places where long after I moved away from there, I still take people and they still have a good time. They still really like the food. Everybody finds something they like. And it's a local neighborhood place. I've never seen it
Hmm.
advertised. You would never know, but it does good business because it's the best thing in the neighborhood.
Yep. Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned that place and that little area right there around the Rockwell stop, like that kind of true like Ravenswood Manor area, because Ravenswood Manor is a very small area, but it's so nice. I mean, it's how it borders along the river there, and I
Yeah.
think there's only I want to say there's only like there's a very small number of houses that actually have dock slips,
Mm-hmm.
that you can actually be on the river, and they're all right there. It's only like 9 or 10 that have it.
Wow.
Um, yeah, and there's all the parks that line the river along there, that public access parks and things like that. It's a beautiful, beautiful area. One of my
Yeah, I
favorites.
think I think one of the smallest parks in Chicago might be there too. Buffalo Park, I think it's called. It's a
Hmm.
tiny little triangle where Manor and California meet, and it's like,
Hmm.
10 feet wide. But it has the sign, Chicago Park District, and I think it's got to be one of the smallest parks in
Yeah,
Chicago.
wouldn't doubt it. What would you say are what are some reasons why somebody wouldn't want to live here? Have you noticed, are there any cons, or even like have you seen any kind of safety concerns in your time living here or anything like that?
Um, I guess like from a safety standpoint, I've not seen more crime than you would expect in a big city, and also even then, I think it's much less crime than you kind of hear about in other neighborhoods. There has been, I think, in the most general sense, somebody did get shot off of like the Kedzie or the Kedzie Brown Line stop. There have been occasional you know gunshots or things like that are you always read about the day after and kind of go, oh, that's what that was, car backfiring. I mean, nobody's been murdered on my street. Is that the barometer that we're going for that I know about? But yeah, it's one of those things. I would say that Chicago is grossly mischaracterized on the world stage. National politics loves to call Chicago a war zone, um,
Yep.
and I don't think that's fair. It's obviously very biased. It's obviously very false, being used to paint liberal cities as some kind of, awful thing. I have always felt safe in these neighborhoods. It's like it happens, but it's not a concern of mine. And I've never had to worry about going out in daylight. Nor has my girlfriend, I will say. So it's not
Hmm.
just, a male privilege thing that I'm talking about here. So no,
Yeah.
I really don't see crime as being an issue in this neighborhood specifically. And generally the Ravenswood area has not ever struck me as being a dangerous place. As far as why people wouldn't want to live here, I can't really think about it. Some people do need to be a little bit closer to like the red line for work. And so even just going to Belmont or Fullerton and needing to transfer can be rough. So those people tend to move into the eastern more neighborhoods.
Hmm.
But that has not been me, so I've never needed to look at it. Um, I know Edgewater, Avondale, those are kind of really cool neighborhoods too. They have a lot of the same things that Irving Park does. But I'm happy here.
Hmm. Yeah, yeah, I think that I would agree. That's probably what it comes down to, is just your proximity to the things that you need to be closer to. Because I do a lot of work downtown and things like that. And I lived in Lincoln Square before I moved. I live in Albany Park now, for pretty close to you. You know this, but for the listeners. And
Yeah, yeah.
Lincoln Square felt far enough away, because it's like you're not really that close to the highway or Lakeshore Drive, so it's just like most of your commute time is just getting to the thing that gets you to the thing. And this is driving wise, not public transit. And then moving to Albany Park that way is like definitely added another whole another like 10 minutes, which does it does matter sometimes. Like when
Yeah.
you're used to it being a 30-minute drive to downtown, now it's 40-45 depending on traffic. And so it's like, yeah,
Well,
there's
here,
definitely a thing.
yeah, here's something I'll say. Like, so I have a control test here, right? Because there was the one time I lived in Oak Park. So I moved from, 2 or 3 apartments that were in Lincoln Square fully out to Oak Park. I lived and Oak Park itself is actually kind of small. It's like a suburb, but it's within the city limits. It's east of
It's on
Harlem.
the CTA,
Yeah,
so
it's on the
yeah.
CTA. There you go. But here's the thing. So it's again, you take the Green Line out. It's about 30 minutes to get to the Austin stop, which is where Oak Park begins, and further away. And Oak Park, at least, is right on the highway. So you don't have a lot of that, like getting to commuting. But it did
Hey,
just
sorry,
feel.
let me back you up. Sorry, I missed you. So I dropped you at you take the CTA to Austin.
Oh, okay. Um,
Sorry.
yeah, no worries. Uh, let's see. So CTA to Austin, and it's, the same distance to downtown in terms of time on the CTA from Lincoln Square. But it feels a lot further out, I think. Living in Oak Park, you're kind of in a bubble. You're kind of, it feels disconnected in many ways to actually live there than it does in Lincoln Square. Getting that perspective
Hmm.
was huge for me. Oak Park, we moved to actually shorten a commute out to Oak Brook. And it was a nice medium between living in the suburbs and living in the city. But it didn't feel ultimately like I was living in Chicago. And so I kind of gained that extra perspective of what it's like to be even close and accessible on the L, but to not feel attached to the city. And well, you know how I feel about it because I moved right back to Ravenswood right after.
Yeah. Yeah, and I feel like Lincoln Square and Oak Park are actually like just lifestyle wise are pretty. You're gonna get a pretty similar vibe because even like some of these cities or some of these neighborhoods within Chicago almost feel like their own little village. Like Lincoln Square, you feel like you're in like the downtown of like a quaint little village somewhere. You know?
And Oak Park is a village.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah.
So you have a solid sample size. You've been around, you've been here for 15 years. What would you say how have these neighborhoods or the city in general, just in your observation, changed over the years?
It's been a bit rough, I would say, because I've seen the struggle, sort of like the economic struggle of everyone is raising prices. And I have also had my share sample size of the landlord experience. Because I have only rented, and I think that's another important thing to kind of shout out. Is I'm not a
Hmm.
homeowner yet,
Yep.
and so from the renting perspective, I've seen the way that various landlords handle their properties, or in some cases don't handle their properties. And
Hmm.
it's been interesting to see as sort of costs got tighter, the ways in which these landowners are sort of reacting or responding to that like economic tightening. I want to say the actual neighborhoods, we just end up losing more of those uh businesses that we love. Their lease is getting raised past the point where business can no longer make sense. So I've seen a lot of businesses leave because their rent is too high. And that's been kind of the unfortunate thing about it. Or you'll see entire strip malls bulldozed for more apartment buildings. And it's like, well, there were things that people would go and see and do in those strip malls, and now they can't
Yeah.
so much. Yes, we need more housing, but not at the expense of some of these, places to go and do and eat and be merry.
Yeah. Yeah. You need places to live, but you also need reasons to live there.
That's a great way of putting it.
Yeah. I say that about the South Loop a lot. I mean, I like the South Loop, but like the South Loop is just like these gorgeous high rise, they're just like building them like crazy. It's like all these gorgeous high rise like apartment buildings and stuff. But then once you're like down there in the heart of the South Loop, it's kind of like, well, I mean, yeah, there's a couple restaurants, I guess. There's a couple things to do, but it's not
Well,
like,
yeah. I mean, they all close at 5 p.m. or aren't open
yeah,
weekends. It's like, what
yeah.
the hell? It's like, oh, we do the majority of our business for the commuters, for the people that work downtown, and we don't need to be open for literally anyone else. And it's like, oh God, living
Hmm.
down there must be awful. You have to do takeout all the time or delivery.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. Yeah. So, yeah, those are all good things. What is one story or memory that encapsulates your experience here?
That is interesting. Story or memory? Um, I think it's a few years ago, figuring out that the park by me, there's a lot of parks by me, but I would say Horner Park specifically, which
Mhm.
is between Montrose and Irving, east of California to the river. And Horner Park is a wonderful park. I go there multiple times a week now. There's a dog park there. The hiking path that's there is exactly a mile, so you can do a circuit and measure, your distance and
Hmm.
stuff, which is something that I do. But no, just going to a movies in the park event. I think they were showing Back to the Future, and Horner Park has like a little hill at the north end south of the tennis courts. And on that hill, it fits so many people. And at the bottom, they have the screen going. And I think just taking in a movies in the park movie, it was a, beautiful night, not too hot, not too cold. That felt like the, real encapsulation of what it meant to live in the neighborhood, was just go take in a movie in the park, bunch of strangers, bring a picnic blanket,
Hmm.
and walk home 2-3 blocks, whatever it was. It was a lot closer even than walking to the train. So I just think
Mhm.
that kind of experience, that kind of laid back um, environment with things that being in a big city provide, like public movies, really is just the icing on the cake and the cherry on top of living here.
Yeah. Yeah, movies in the park. I haven't done that in a while. I kind of forgot about that, but yeah, I've done that quite a few times. That is a really cool thing that we do, and it happens all over the city. I mean, pretty much, every neighborhood has something like that going on throughout the summer. I remember the first one of those I did. It was in the Tribune building downtown, like in that plaza right there, kind of like by
Mhm.
the Apple store right there by the river.
Cool.
They set up a giant projection there and played The Dark Knight.
Oh my God.
Famously shot in Chicago,
Yeah,
most of
the
it,
only
and
the only thing cooler is if they did it in front of the Board of Trade, because that's where the truck flips
yeah,
in
yeah,
in the movie. Is that literally? Oh my
yep,
God. But yeah,
for
there's a lot
sure.
of, that's another element, the pride in Chicago, especially when they're doing a Chicago thing like The Dark Knight. That was huge when that was filming here, and you couldn't get down on Lower Wacker for like a month, but it was really, really awesome. Getting to be a part of what you felt like cultural history. Is like Chicago is Gotham. And it's funny
Hmm.
though, because the adverse effect too, like Gotham in the movie is the most crime addled, like, horrible place where like you think being anybody must suck to be there. But at the same time, it raises the awareness, and that movie in particular, The Dark Knight, really drew attention to like the architecture and a lot of like the
Hmm.
cool spots and things. So a little bit of, column A, column B.
Yeah. Well, I think that's all I got for you for the for this portion of it. What are you working on these days? What are you excited about?
Yeah, I mean, I'm again just thrilled to have come on here, so thank you for that.
Thank
And
you.
I do love Chicago. I do love my neighborhood. Right now I'm just continuing the podcast. And we mentioned my Harry Potter podcast is called MuggleCast. It is still weekly after all these years, after all this time.
Nice. Keep
But
it
you can
going.
find that wherever you find podcasts. And then I have a personal podcast, which is currently on hiatus, but I did enjoy doing it, and it's called Thank You for Spieling. Those who've listened to this episode, I probably talk quite a bit, very passionately, but this podcast was about talking passionately with friends about things that they like to do. So it was, we did about 30 episodes or so, including some informational episodes on COVID when that was first happening, with my friend who does research and very scientific brain, which I am not. You can learn a lot. You can have a lot of fun just by checking out my podcast. Again, thank you for spieling, Spieling. And most recently, a buddy of mine and I went through the Last of Us HBO series, and a whole season was dedicated to rewatching or watching for the first time that show while it was airing. So it's really just my personal, gonna make this show anything I want, be as regular as I want it to be, have full creative control, and it was well received.
Awesome. And I'll have the link to both of those in the show notes for this too.
Yeah.
Yeah, I still need to catch the last episode of The Last of Us. I've been lagging on that, but been very taking my time with that show.
Are
Yeah.
you unspoiled?
What do you mean?
Like, do you know what happens in the last episode of that show?
I don't know. I never
Okay.
played the game or any of that. So yeah,
Awesome.
going in blind.
I look forward to you seeing it and then
Cool.
talking about it immediately with me afterwards.
Okay. Now that I know, I will. Yeah, I'll definitely. I'll get that done this week, and I'll let you know.
Awesome.
Cool. All right. Well, hey, Eric, thank you so much for your time and your thoughts and everything else, all your help. And I don't really know how to sign off, so I guess I'll just say bye.
I assume there's music playing, so bye,
There's
everybody.
probably going to be some kind of music playing, maybe. I don't know. We'll figure that out. All right.
Cool.
Thanks.